Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the JPOMA webinar on tenant application fraud. As usual, with all JPOMA webinars, we will be starting off with Michelle from TPN to give us an update on the collection and vacancy report. For those of you who haven't been on a JPOMA webinar before, just to let you know, Michelle is the Managing Director and co-founder of TPN Credit Bureau, which was founded in 2000, so 20 years in existence. Well done again. TPN is South Africa's only credit bureau specializing in the collection of tenant behavior and rental payment profile information. It is the first credit bureau globally to specialize in the property industry. TPN works very closely with global credit bureaus, TransUnion and Experian, in order to further enhance the tenant vetting process. Michelle, over to you.
Thanks, Angela. I am going to share screen. Okay. Can everyone see that? Give me a thumbs up, Angela. Perfect. Okay, perfect. So today, being the midway through November, I thought I'd share the November JPOMA data. Also, as a heads up to my JPOMA members, the vacancy survey request goes out today, and as you know, we keep it open for a week. Depending on numbers, we even re-request on Monday and Tuesday of next week. So if everyone could just complete that survey in the next week, particularly very helpful because we do go down into the area of Johannesburg and then we can feed back your vacancy data, which, as you know, for Q3 we're sitting at just over 11%. So I'm holding thumbs that it's coming down. I'm not hopeful, but I am holding thumbs. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to chat about today. So obviously we're going to look at job recovery first because we need job recovery first before we can look at rental recovery. I'm looking at the JPOMA good standing. Please excuse my spelling there, and escalations, which are for the current Q3 data. So this is StatsSA as they're reporting at the moment. And you can see that job losses in the lockdown deteriorated by 13.5% year-on-year changes. But the good news is that they have come up a little bit. So we're only 10.5% or 10.3% down. Really, in order for rental recovery to happen, what we really need is we need job recovery, both in terms of the number of people employed, as well as the value of earnings that people are getting back to. I did look at the take-home pay survey, the bank take-home pay survey data, and it definitely looks like they're a leading indicator on the StatsSA data. So BankServe looks at people that are in the formal sector earning revenue back into their bank accounts, and that looks at about 3 million consumers. And their numbers are definitely showing leading indicator towards this data as well. And I also looked at FNB data, and FNB had a look at where the loss of earnings was still quite prevalent. That's at the very low end of the market and at the very top end of the market. So the very wealthy earners still 10% down on their earnings. That would, in my mind, that would speak to people that are earning management fees and dividends and bonuses and that type of earning, as well as at the really low end of the market. And those are people that are kind of cash earners, weekly wage earners, those type of earners. Both of those sitting 10% down from where they were prior to lockdown. The middle income earners are all back to where they were earning in terms of value. So we're not talking about, yes, we've had a lot of job losses, but we're talking about the value of what people are earning. And those middle income earners are kind of back to where they were. So that's at least some good news. Just a reminder of the data that I'm looking at in terms of when I aggregate what I see as the JPOMA area. Those are the areas that we're including in the JPOMA data from a good standing perspective. This is now taking into account October data, So you'll have realized that I sent out the rental monitor on Saturday or Sunday, I can't remember. That data is complete for Q3. And if you have read the monitor, you'll see that in Q2, in the hard lockdown period, nationally overall, we bottomed out at 71.9 in the month of May, and there was a slight recovery in the month of June at 72. But pulling us up in the month of April, overall for Q2, we were sitting at 73.57% of tenants in good standing. For Q3, which includes June, July, and August data, overall, the Q3 data ended at 74.57%, so 1.07% increase nationally across all tenants from the bottom out of Q2. I was hoping it was going to be a little bit more actually, but it ended up at 74.57. Currently, where we sit at the moment then, for the month of September, 75.64% of tenants in good standing. October is incomplete. There is a lag on the data. There's a 6-week lag on the data. So October, I'm very clearly identifying here as being incomplete, and I expect it to end up closer to the 76, maybe just over 76 percentage points. The story there is that there is a recovery. It is a very slow recovery, but the numbers, the trends are at least going in the right direction. So how does JPOMA fare against that? JPOMA dropping down in the hard lockdown to 53%, kind of stagnating, 53.72, 53.96, 54, slow recovery up to 56. And again, I do believe that the JPOMA data, because of the lag, will definitely end up at 56.5, maybe even breaching and getting into that 57 percentage points. So the recovery is still there, and we're definitely seeing the numbers tick over and recover, albeit very, very, very slowly at the moment. And it's about job recovery first. I thought I'd bring in the escalation data because we only published this on Saturday, so this is really new data. In terms of escalations, you can see that rental escalations nationally are sitting at 0.65%. How do we do our escalations? They're on a per property basis. So I'm looking at what is the value of rent on a per property or per unit basis now, as it was 12 months ago. So it's an annual escalation based on a per property, and then we aggregate it into, for example, in this instance, I'm doing it on province, and just now show it to you on rental value. So the story here is that the Western Cape for the first time is sitting in negative escalation, minus 0.62%. Gauteng still sitting at 0.62%. And because we are already in Q4, I am able to tell you preliminary data. I have had a look at it, and Gauteng has also breached and gone into negative escalation for Q4, although we're not reporting on it at the moment. It's still an incomplete quarter. And so there's definitely price sensitivity in the market at the moment. If I was to look at it on a per value band perspective, you can see that the top end of the market, the 12,000 plus rentals, negative escalation at 1.94%, and the 7 to 12,000 have dipped into that negative escalation of 0.63%. Again, for Q4, and it's an incomplete month, preliminary data shows that the 3 to 7,000 has also breached and has gone into negative escalation as well. So these are just factors that we need to be aware of and be considerate of in terms of escalations versus vacancies. It is obviously a very fine line at the moment, and a lot of price sensitivity. A couple of graphs that I haven't put in, and I know they've been bandied around in markets. I didn't want to throw them in at the moment, but absolutely, when we ask tenants at the moment, what are they looking for? What are their top 3 factors when applying for rental? When we gave them 50 different options to look at, they would select their top 3, and then they would rank their most important factors when they're looking to rent at the moment. And over 50% of tenants that responded said price was the most important factor that they look at. And the second most important factor is security. So how secure is the environment that they are living in? And not just from an actual security perspective, but from a perception perspective as well. Number 3 coming in is fascinating because it's pets. Pets are more important than any other tenant requirement, although it is much more prevalent in the in the older generations, the above 60-year-olds, and in the more expensive, above 12,000 Rand value bracket. And then the biggest factor that tenants frustrate tenants within their lease agreements, maintenance came out as the biggest factor. For me, this is very important information because this is stuff that landlords are able to address themselves. This is within the control of the landlord. Price sensitivity, security, and maintenance of property are all within the landlord's ability to manage. Angela, that's me for the moment as my lead-in.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. I don't know if Nick or Kevin have any questions. I don't have any questions in the panel. And if no one has any questions, we'll just move swiftly on because we know why we're here. So next up, we have Kevin van den Heever, who's the Managing Director of Afhco, which is the Africa Housing Company. Kevin joined Afhco in 2006 as the Financial Director, and in 2010, he was appointed the Managing Director. He's got nearly 15 years experience in the inner city affordable housing market. Afhco is one of the leading providers of affordable housing and retail spaces in Johannesburg inner city, with the intention to spread to other areas throughout South Africa as well as sub-Saharan Africa. Kevin excels in strategic planning and development, as well as a strong focus on marketing strategies and portfolio management. Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, Angela, and hi to everybody. I think just in terms of your intro, we might need to rethink our website strategy in terms of going into sub-Saharan Africa, as I think we all have to revisit our strategic intent. So I think you know, we had seen a dramatic increase in the number of fraudulent applications that started, I would say, even before lockdown. But we've definitely seen a notable increase in fraudulent activity post-lockdown. So when Angela had sent out a request for topics, I thought, you know, maybe it's a good idea just to address this again. I think we've all encountered the fraudulent applications year in and year out. I don't think there's too many people that would not have come across the fraudulent applications, but I thought it would be a good opportunity just to revisit it. So my intention today is maybe just to touch on something slightly new that happened with us. And in fact, the overall nature of what transpired is fairly similar to what we're accustomed to, but with one subtle difference, collusion. So that's something that I'd like to just highlight, to everybody today to keep it, front of mind. And second to that, I'm just going to share a couple of examples of fraudulent documents, again, just so that people have the benefit of understanding just how easy it actually is to identify poor fake documents, and maybe less so on the good ones. So I think most people probably would have seen there was an SABC expose that was done more or less 2 years ago. And it was an expose just on how easy it is to obtain fraudulent documents. So I thought, there may be newer members that have not had the benefit of seeing that. So I have asked Angela to play that for everybody. So it's just 3 minutes. So for those that have seen it, if you can just indulge me, but for those that have not, I think it's very worthwhile.
At this internet cafe in Yeoville, Johannesburg, forged payslips and bank statements are just a print away.
I'm telling you.
We meet this man who tells us about someone who can make things happen for us.
Any way you like it, all of these children, anybody you ask, his name is Kagis, you say Rasta man. Nobody took a call him. There's nothing. He's a grandmaster.
So we meet Kagiso, known as Rasta, and ask him if he can provide the documents.
I need a 3-month statement,
yeah,
and a payslip.
And which bank should I use for? Which bank can you use?
Use
Capitec.
Yeah. Is Capitec better?
Yeah, it's better. You can use as many companies as possible, like, you know.
It's Capitec.
How much?
Confirmation is 200 on its own.
Yeah. And the other thing?
Yeah, the bank statement is 200. Pay slips is $100 each on original paper.
Rasta gets down to fabricating a tailor-made payslip and bank statements. He's a busy man, inundated by clients, and after about 30 to 45 minutes, this is what we get for 600 rands. The payslip with a randomly chosen name and surname that we provided. The ID number of an unknown person, working for a company that Rasta chose, in a position of our choice, earning this amount. And 3 months bank statements with what appears to be the official stamp of one of the big banks. So we tested the number on the payslip to confirm if our non-existent employee works at the stated company.
Hello?
Hello?
You still there?
Yes?
Yeah, thank you for holding. Let me check on the system. Amanda, let me get up. All right, wait. Yes, ma'am. Amanda Ngela is our senior supervisor.
Okay, and what is her date of engagement with you?
The date of engagement is the 17th of July 2015.
Oh, all right, all right. You said Amanda is a senior supervisor with you.
Yes, ma'am, she is.
And surprising, the bogus company confirms a bogus employee. And that opens the door to a world of credit, ramping up debt of thousands or even millions of rand, and no one can trace you. Criselda Lewis, SABC News in Johannesburg.
All right, thanks, Angela. So for those that haven't seen that, I think, you can see just how easy, it is to obtain these fake documents, and obviously at a very reasonable price as well. So, the level of fraud hinges on a couple of things, and it's, how well prepared the documents are, the follow-up in terms of employment, and these are all items that I'm going to touch on under the tip section when I show a couple more items. So I think in a typical fraudulent environment, often one sees that a tenant in this case, or in our case, or an applicant when applying for credit or whatever other form of product, typically if one looks at it, relies on the documents that they have in hand when submitting it to whichever organization they're dealing with. And I say that they somewhat roll the dice in that they are gambling on the outcome, because the success depends largely, as I said, in terms of the documents that they've provided, but also preys on any weaknesses that may exist in a company in doing the follow-up checks, the employment checks, which is not always done or not always possible. In our most recent case, unfortunately, the modus operandi was slightly different, not from the point of view of any documentary evidence or the like, but more for the collusion that it involved. So, one tends to disregard or think it impossible what can take place within one's own home, so to speak. And in our case, unfortunately, we found out the hard way that where collusion is involved, the gambling outcome becomes more certain, as opposed to just rolling the dice and hoping. So in our case, you know, just to touch on as well, just to maybe give a bit of background. So Afhco have always operated a external agent model. I know many JPOMA members use the same model. Others use staff entirely for their leasing process. We have always used external or independent brokers for the function, who are then supported by internal leasing administrators. So, you know, the purpose of me mentioning that is not to promote a particular way. It's just to highlight that there are different ways of obviously leasing being undertaken, and the same pitfalls, you know, can exist in either chosen method. The second point that I wanted to note is just that, you know, Afhco also recently automated a portion of its application process. And by automation, it's purely to serve as a high-level indicator, you know, whether an application will be successful or not. And how that's done is looking at, you know, 3 criteria. It's obviously the affordability, it's the creditworthiness of the applicant, which we take as successful if a credit score of 3 or above is achieved, which I think is called, I think it's a C or average. I see Michelle is nodding there, so thanks for that. As well as having no adverse listings. So we created a system which auto calculates all of those items, but it's all based on, well, the first one is based entirely on an input from an administrator in terms of the salary. Can the person afford it? We've built a rule in place and it auto checks that for us. The further to the credit score as well as the adverse listings is a simple API which we have with TPN. So it literally calls the data from TPN in a matter of seconds, scores it for us automatically based on the rules that we have set in place, and it gives either green lights or red lights. Now, I'm just raising this again, A, to give background, but also just B, in terms of, obviously with what's happened with COVID, you know, prop tech has become a big buzzword, and everybody's looking at ways to simplify their business and undertaking various considerations of system builds, system enhancements, you know, whatever you want to call it. But I think just at the outset, I just want to note that one should strongly consider how the system will operate. Don't assume that we'll just fix all problems. There's a lot of complexity and things that need to be considered when going down the automation route in that. So as I've said, so we've got the agent model, plus we've got the system which gives us a high-level indicator of whether an applicant is successful or not. So in our case, what happened, and I'm just gonna try and share screen. So sorry, I've just created 3 simple. Can somebody just confirm, Angela, can you see that? Thanks. So, yeah, so I've just created 3 simple slides, but the first one is basically just a simple view of what transpired in our world in terms of the collusion and where it differs, as I say, from a typical fraud. So, prospective tenant, who we'll call tenant A, applies for accommodation in a building. So in our case, we had this prospective tenant apply for a unit in one of our buildings. Whether they used fake documents or legitimate documents, you know, I'm not sure, but either case could be possible. So it's important to note that tenant A is a producer of fraudulent documents. So in the example, obviously with the internet cafe, whilst that is on the high street, you now have somebody looking to move into your property who's looking to do the same thing. Tenant A then forms a relationship with agent, who we'll call agent A, and clearly suggests that there's a way to work together. Agent A, in turn, recruits building manager, who we'll call building manager A, to refer a house seeker without papers. So I'll touch on these elements in further detail. I'm just going to brush through them first. Agent A then recruits leasing administrator. Leasing administrator recruits other leasing administrators. Fraudulence are then channeled carefully to avoid detection and bypass the system. And hopefully at the end of the day, in their case, everybody gets paid. So the exact order of how events transpired is still not entirely clear to us. But I think what is important, for instance, we don't know whether 4 came before 3, for instance. We don't believe it was the case, but it is entirely possible that a tenant could approach a building manager first, who then approaches the agent. It's just important to understand that these type of things can be done. So naturally, the prospective tenant is after pipeline. He's looking for business. And therefore, he finds somebody who's obviously most capable of bringing him the pipeline, and that is an agent. Alternatively, a building manager where those don't use external agents. The agent, in order to secure further pipeline for himself as well, therefore recruits the building manager. Because the building manager obviously gets many walk-ins, or at least in our environment, gets many walk-ins. And this applies wholly to people who do not have documents, who would not qualify, but they're making an inquiry nonetheless. And it is building manager's job to connect the prospective or the fraudulent tenant with the agent, who then connects the individual with tenant A, who is residing in the building. They, so earlier, again, I said, just to reiterate, that the success of these fraudulent transactions, I mean, it really is, rolling a dice, because, it's very difficult, unless your systems are that poor or the documents are that good, for fraudulent documents to get through. I would suggest that we probably snuff out easily 95% of fraudulent documents that come our way. However, in cases like this, in order for it to succeed, to improve your odds, you obviously need somebody who's directly involved, working at the coalface. And in this case, in our case, it's obviously the leasing administrators. And agents over time build up very close relationships with leasing administrators, because after all, they're dependent on them to get through their applications. They tend to have favorites. An agent will form a close bond with a particular leasing administrator, will take most of his applications to them, and in the hope that they deal with their applications swiftly. So in this case, the leasing administrator's role then becomes obviously very important. And what we were able to pick up, and how they were able to evade detection, as it were, was simply by pretending to be doing what they should have been doing, as well as to be playing the system, as it were. So in the first part, as I'd mentioned, our system is catered to look at what income the person's earning. And in the simple case where they obviously ensured that payslips were created for the correct values for the apartment that were going to be applied for, so that none of them fell below the threshold. We did actually pick up one situation where the income was actually deliberately inflated above that which appeared on the payslips to essentially pass the test on the income basis. Secondly, employment checks were not performed properly. They were only purportedly done. So fake references were created in a lot of cases. Fake telephone numbers, individuals who they had spoken to were tabled. In a lot of the cases, the sophistication wasn't there, as in the video that you've just seen, where they actually had somebody who could be contacted to confirm employment. In a lot of the cases, we determined that that did not exist. Thirdly, and one which we found quite interesting, is in terms of the credit score, in terms of the average credit score that we referred to, was where they are able to play on the system is by using asylum permits. And Michelle, sorry, I didn't chat to you beforehand, so I'm going to raise something, and you're welcome to speak to it now, or you can speak to it later. But what we saw is that an asylum seeker automatically gets a C rating on the basic credit score. So in our world, that ticked the box for one of the rules that we had set. Whereas, and a lot of the applicants we see are South Africans actually, who then use asylum permits to get the C rating or credit score. Whereas if they had used their own ID numbers, they would have reflected their true credit score, which would have been an E or an F, and they would have been less likely to then obviously qualify. But with a C, they somewhat escape under the radar of detection as being somebody with no credit record. I just want to share my screen again. Angela, just give me a thumbs up that my screen changed.
Not yet. You're still in screen share, so I think you might have to cancel if you're doing a different screen.
What are you seeing now?
Still the real life scenario.
Strange. Still the same?
Yep.
Sorry.
Got it.
So just to highlight, so I have obviously tried to not disclose any information that I shouldn't, or just considered that I shouldn't. So you'll see all photographs have been taken out. Key bits of information you'll see that have been scratched out. But what I have just done is here, because I'm going to talk to it a little bit later as well in terms of foreign nationals and the law around that. But, this is just a simple asylum permit. And what I wanted to just highlight is the reference number that gets assigned to it, the individual's names, obviously, the nationality, and then importantly, what the permit holder is entitled to do in the country. In this case, work and study. So I'll touch on the latter, work and study part just now. But in a case like this, this is the typical credit score that will then get generated for an asylum seeker. And Michelle, again, sorry, I'm gonna, the questions that I have around that would ultimately be, what the status is around how this operates and at what point an asylum seeker may, if at all, get a credit score in South Africa, and whether that's built up over time or if it simply just does not come through. Sorry guys, I'm just having difficulty with my sharing. Eh? Angela, did it change again? Thanks. So this is the one scenario whereby asylum documents are submitted. The second, again, is simply by doing exactly what I described earlier with improper employment checks and the like, but leaving the person's actual South African ID in place with the understanding that it could be a lower credit score, but with the hope that it will still surpass a test and be approved on the strength of the administrator having performed all the other necessary checks and it just being a credit score that's potentially problematic. So ultimately, you know, and again, I'm going to go through the strength of documents now. You know, ultimately, we were able to snuff this out as well. It wasn't immediate, but I think if one follows the simple rules, you know, ultimately you will, you know, the strength of your systems and processes and all of that need to be good. And, you know, ultimately with strong systems and that, you should uncover it, no matter the amount of collusion. And unfortunately, we live in a time where collusion, you know, these type of practices do exist. And, you know, again, when I go through the tips, you know, hopefully people can take something away from that. So I think the first tip that I do have is to not take vetting lightly. I mean, it's that simple. You know, one has to check the supporting documents thoroughly. That, you know, that becomes particularly true. So obviously we work in an environment where we rely on staff in the main to do the checks for us. You know, one cannot check every single document and application that comes through your business, and you employ people who you rely on to do these steps and procedures for you. I think it's particularly true during busy periods when you are dealing with, you know, it's easy to say when you're dealing with 1 or 2 applications in a day, but when you are dealing with dozens and dozens of applications on a particular day and speed is of the essence, it is understandable how some of these things can slip through the cracks. It's also easy, or it's easier possibly to get tempted to look at applications with skewed judgment, possibly when you're operating in times of high vacancy. Obviously, we're all under pressure to close down on vacancies. We're operating in a period which we've never seen before, with vacancies skyrocketing, an economy that's even pre-lockdown was having difficulty. So for at least the short term, you know, I think we're going to see the same challenges exist. We hope it's not too much distant than the short term, but also we have a supply where we have a temporary supply issue in the market. And that I think for the first time, I think the supply really seems to be outstripping, you know, the demand at the moment. But I think, as I say, vetting should be taken seriously. With each application should be viewed exactly the same way, no matter how busy the period, no matter what your vacancy levels, just to ensure that you're not overlooking anything. Sorry, a lot of these points somewhat overlap, but I did feel it was necessary just to mention each one. I think leading on from that is to train staff and agents continuously. So new things develop in terms of how fraudulent documents are produced and the like. New tricks of the trade come out, and we find that it is critical that one just continuously highlights these type of things to those involved, just so that complacency doesn't set in. Now, fake documents, poorly constructed fake documents, are so easy to spot to the trained eye, but to the untrained eye, you'll be surprised what can escape the net. So I wanted to show just a few examples. Angela, sorry, I'm going to ask you every time I change, if you can just give me the thumbs up. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So this is a genuine Capitec account, and I'm just going to point out some obvious things that between this and a fake bank statement, and this is how easy it is to detect fake documents. So in this example, I want you to pay attention to the layout, obviously, but just subtle points to note. Techno Park is spelled with two words. The bank code appears below Stellenbosch. The font, as it appears here, is a particular size font. Similarly over here, your layout. If one goes to a fake Capitec statement, everything else, if you were to look at it very quickly, you would think, oh, this is the genuine article. But you will see just how easy it is to pick it up. Techno Park is now spelled with one word. The postal code now appears alongside Stellenbosch and not below it. The font is smaller. The tax invoice and VAT registration number, sorry, I forgot to highlight on the previous one, are also missing. That's one example. A second example, so the first obviously relates to bank statements. The second relates to just tying information back to other supporting documents. Sorry, I'll make it bigger again just so that we can see. So in this case, this is somebody applying through a business, if memory serves. Sorry, I just want to get, no, sorry. On this one, you will note the ID number is registered as 96, whatever the case. And if one simply, sorry, the name, sorry, what's important to look at here is the name. So the surname is Causa. Sorry, I'd taken out the first and second name. One goes to the bank statement that was submitted. The first one was for a gentleman. This is for a lady. Surname entirely different. Again, a simple check should reveal that this is, fraudulent in nature. Again, the same issues that I raised. In fact, this is actually someone's genuine bank statement that had been attached to this application. The third and fourth one, I believe, are examples of applying through businesses. In both cases, I think they were foreign nationals. And what I just wanted to highlight, which is in a very grainy copy, is that this passport starts with CN, followed by a couple of numerals. And one goes to the StatsSA sheet, and it's all of a sudden becomes an ID number, and the ID number is nonsensical. It just has 6 zeros at the end. Similarly, with the next example, again, you have a passport with an FN designation. You come forward to the StatsSA document, and it's a BN, and the numbers are entirely different. So and that's why I stress it is not difficult to pick up a lot of these fake documents. One just has to apply their mind and look at the documents carefully. The third tip that I would like to suggest is obviously to perform a credit check. So I'm not going to address the importance of the credit check because Michelle's going to do that later. But there are certain businesses that still don't believe in the merits of doing a credit check. Obviously, we strongly suggest that it is important. Tip number 4, confirmation of employment is not to be taken lightly. So again, we don't believe it's good enough that one simply verifies a payslip to a bank statement as a confirmation of employment, because again, your fake documents could easily marry the two up, and therefore physically confirming someone's employment is certainly a preference. What I had suggested to you earlier in terms of where some of our administrators had bucked the system was by simply forging, as it were, the confirmation of employment. So we believe that it is vital that those checks do get carried out. The 5th one is to confirm the previous residence. So this is a very difficult one because a lot of people or in our experience, a lot of applicants don't have a TPN profile from a past landlord. People are often, you find it difficult to get a reference from them on a past residence. But to the extent you can get it, and people are willing to share it and all of that, it is certainly, in our view, vital that one confirms that as well. Next, I would say, do not assume anything regarding the authenticity of documents. So again, in a couple of it, and I haven't shown it now, I think it will be in a couple of the others that I show shortly. But just because a document says VIP payroll or Sage payroll and that, please understand that the tools of the trade to produce these documents can be bought off the shelf. I can get a license for VIP payroll tomorrow and I can start generating fake payslips. So, as I said, don't assume anything regarding the authenticity. Similarly, do not assume anything regarding an applicant. So, fraudulent application shouldn't be considered to be exclusive to a particular nationality, race, gender, or anything like that. So whilst the market that we serve, and I speak broadly, is largely the inner city market, which has a particular demographic in that, as I say, do not assume that it applies solely to such individuals. I want to show you an example. And again, this talks to the point I've just made, but plus also just how poor the documents are. So this was a female applicant for which we received this pay slip. And again, I'm just pointing out just because of the point that I made earlier. So this was a female of African descent. This was the payslip we received, and somewhat 2 months earlier or 2 months later, sorry, I can't remember, we received an application from this individual of white ethnicity with the exact same payslip as the female applicant. The only things that had been changed were the names. Even the ID number was not changed. So in this case, we had an ID number of 85, starting with 8506, yet the payslip was a 9403, which tied up to the original payslip. So obviously in their haste to execute on these documents, they forgot to change the ID number. But one can see, do not assume anything about an applicant that comes to your door. This happens to be on our suburban portfolio, where we were able to pick up, and I think it was partly through the ID. Well, sorry, I'm not actually sure, let me not speculate. But it just goes to show you that these documents are just traded in volume, that there's not much thought that goes into it. It's just a printing press with a few changes. So more from a control perspective, obviously, it is good practice to encourage segregation of duties as far as possible. It's not foolproof. We had it, yet there was collusion, throughout the process. But chances of it happening are slimmer than if you didn't have it. So again, I think it's wise to practice that to the extent you can. Importantly, proper oversight is necessary. So again, just because one has a system which is deemed to take care of a particular function or assist in the performance of that function, plus you rely on individuals who you believe are trustworthy, do not shy away from proper oversight. People need to be managed, people need to be checked. Without that, you end up in a situation that we found ourselves in. I think it's important to note that people are fallible. People go through different challenges in life. Different pressures can come to bear, and people may be trustworthy today, but life circumstances can change that. So proper oversight is critical. I think another thing is to promote a culture of ethical behavior. So we again being we always did, but more so being part of a listed entity, we certainly have code of ethics, we have other conduct policies, and it's something that gets promoted to the staff that they need to adhere to these type of things. And whilst most people are ethical and behave in a proper manner, obviously we've seen that not everybody is. And having this in place, it is a bit of an insurance policy as well, to the extent something does go wrong, that you do have a book that you can throw at them when it comes to possible labor disputes and the like down the line. So promoting this type of behavior is certainly important, particularly given we have such poor role models in society today with all the corruption and theft and everything that goes on, that we certainly take a view that it's good to promote good behavior. And then the last tip that I just wanted to give is possibly, know the law as it applies to letting to foreign nationals. So I just want to make it clear. So the reason for raising this has got nothing to do with our view or my view on foreign nationals at all. We've obviously housed and provided business premises to foreign nationals for 20 years. We have very good relationships with foreign nationals, but I think it's important, given that a lot of the documents are asylum seeker permits, that one does need to understand what the law is with regards to foreign nationals. So the first point to note is that legally landlords are permitted to let their properties to foreign nationals, provided they are in the country legally. And the Immigration Act actually makes it a criminal offense if one lets their properties to to foreign nationals that are not in the country legally. The Immigration Act defines a legal foreign as a person in possession of either a valid visa that entitles them to study, work, or do business in South Africa for a certain period, or a permanent residence permit approved by the DHA. So earlier on the asylum permit, I did highlight the work or study and work, and that's exactly what that talks to, and why I highlighted it. So it's important to look at what the purpose of the visit is, to see whether they are validly in the country. And then again, just the temporary residence permits that do exist are the visitor's permit, work, or entrepreneurial permit. And any of these are valid permits. So again, I think it just is important that everybody does understand that taking on illegal foreigners, not that I've seen it before, but can become an issue. I don't think we're not Home Affairs in that, but I think we do need to obviously demonstrate that we are following the rules that are before us. And again, looking at the documents that are presented, I can quite easily see how some illegal foreign nationals will find their way into buildings. But again, I think it's just important that everybody is aware what the law is with regards to that. And then maybe just a last point, and again, which maybe Michelle can touch on just now, is that it's my understanding that, should a foreign national default, they can't be blacklisted. So, okay, she's shaking her head, so that's why I did say I will ask Michelle just to clarify, maybe on that point as well when she has her discussion. So Angela, I think that's that's it from my side. And I'm happy to take some questions right at the end. I think that's when you've set it aside for.
Yes, so yeah, we do have 4 comments in the question and answer boxes, but we'll leave those till the end. Just one of them, which ties up really nicely with what you've said, is with regard to confirming employment. But what is the question here, is a Google check basically good enough to do an employment check to make sure that the company actually exists?
So I think, look, I'm not an expert in Google searches when it comes to businesses, but generally, I think one can set up a Google, a business with an address, etc., that will be found on Google. But I'm not entirely sure. I know when I look for a business that I'm going to, those are credible businesses, and the search results with the address, the business trading hours. I think those are important things to potentially look for. That's how complete those details are, because it's conceivable that somebody could set up a fake business that possibly Google looks to. But again, Google themselves have rules as to how you verify businesses and the like. I know we had great difficulty having our business premises moved when we moved to this property. One had to jump through hoops to verify details with Google. So yeah, very difficult. So confirming the business is one thing. Confirming the actual person's employment at that business is an entirely different thing.
And then Kevin, just without, obviously what you've discovered within Afhco at the moment with all these staff that are involved, without going into too much detail, because obviously I assume you're going to be going legal and all of that. Maybe if you can just give us an idea of how did you find this out? What was the clue that kind of gave away that something funny was happening in your letting department?
So Angela, I think I alluded to it earlier, not directly, but it's, it comes down to having, good processes in place. So whilst we have certain automated functions, and as I say, you do rely on staff to do roles and you can't micromanage every aspect of a business, we do have spot checks that take place at different levels. So whilst it's not every document that gets confirmed, there are certain thresholds, documents over particular values. What we had not done was that we had not insisted on necessarily all the asylum ones get verified. So that is something which we have now done to say, if there's an asylum application, it has to go to managerial level for approval.
Okay.
But in short, yeah, it's just having systems and people, knowing what to look out for.
Okay. All righty. So please continue to put your questions into the questions and answers. We will have a session at the end where between Nick, Michelle, and Kevin, they'll be able to answer those. Kevin, thank you so much, and thank you for bringing this topic to our attention. I think it's really informative. Next, we're going to move over to Nick Barnes. So Nick Barnes is the chairman of JPOMA and the CEO of Jozi Housing. Nick has developed a cross-section of skills over the last 25 years, which include working in small businesses, his own ventures, and large corporates. Nick was appointed CEO of Jozi Housing in 2012. Jozi Housing owns and manages over 3,000 inner city residential units and 2,000 square meters of retail and commercial space. Nick has a passion for inner city rejuvenation and affordable housing. He loves to see bad buildings refurbished and brought back to life. Nick is also a huge supporter of precinct management and community and neighborhood development. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Angela. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I think that Kevin has given us a very good summary of some of the areas, and my sympathies, as his experiences are very raw at the moment. But what I can say is that we, as Jozi Housing, went through a similar exercise in 2016. We uncovered a major fraud within our organization, which went from Exco level right the way down. So much like the Afhco experiences, an intricate and well-developed web of people operating at various levels in the business. So and in fact, when I had the conversation with Paul Jackson, he laughed like a drain. He said, well, Barnes, he said, this is, you're not the first and you certainly won't be the last. So I think that in our business anyway, affordable housing, the desperation of people, as Kevin has alluded to, results in a whole lot of desperate measures. But I think that the situation is worse and perhaps has got worse in that we're dealing with a broken system from government and the documents that you're able to procure, right the way down to the morals of many of the people operating. And unfortunately, despite our best attempts, some of those are within our organizations. So I think that while collusion makes it easier, not having collusion in place doesn't negate the problem. So I haven't got a presentation, but I wanted to talk to some of the issues that we've picked up and tips that may be useful. I think that in looking for looking at specific applications, as Kevin has highlighted, the ability to interrogate the documents carefully and with experience is key, because most of these have some discrepancies or inaccuracies that will show them up for what they are. But it does require the developing of a bit of a skill, a bit of a nose for looking at those things. Kevin has spoken about the font. What we've resorted to doing is actually having versions of particular bank statements with the letting agents. So they're able to refer quite quickly to, this is a genuine one, we know that, and let's just have a look at the one that's in front of us. Font sizes would be one. UIF is often a big kick out, because maximum UIF is 148 Rand 72. And that is often not correctly applied. Often 1% of a 25,000 Rand salary is applied, or the 148 is just included when the person clearly earns a whole bunch more than or less than 100% of that figure. So UIF is a very good one. In terms of checking phone numbers, we will always go to the second or third number listed on the TPN report, not to the first number. We will do a Google check to see whether the company does exist. and check to see that the phone numbers are the same. So while the Google search is not a surefire way of doing it, it does give you an indication. And certainly if you were to log on and look at a TPN or an Afhco or a Jozi housing website, that would be a hell of a lot of effort to have gone to for a bogus company. So that can give you a bit of indication. But largely what you're looking for is to make sure that the employment reference number you've been given is in fact the number for that company. And I would say that what we're doing is we are keeping records of fraudulent, the packs that we get, those fraudulent packs, we are keeping those because we find that a lot of the cell phone or the phone number, the reference phone number, appears more than once. So obviously, like the fellow there in Yeovil, and I think we've probably inadvertently put a lot of business his way, they run out of cell phone numbers or run out of numbers. And so the same number lands up being recycled. In fact, when I spoke to one of my ladies last week on this, she said, oh yeah, and she recited a number, which she said periodically comes through from different companies. What else? Yeah, interrogate and record. We make it as uncomfortable as possible for people who are found to have presented fraudulent documents. Get them in the boardroom, leave them sitting there for a while, and then try and extract some information. We have previously tried to get these cases opened at SAPS. They could be less than interested, not interested in the slightest. We are keeping a group together, and hopefully if other people can do the same, we could be able to try and get some action taken. I don't think that necessarily that's going to solve the problem, because I think that, you know, the moment one individual shuts up shop, somebody else will open. And as Kevin has said, the wherewithal, the tools are very easy. Check ID photographs. Very often we will get a picture that comes up. The photographs don't match. Very easy, very simple to check. Check the signatures on the new ID cards, for example. There is a signature. Check that that signature is correct. I think that all of this goes back to having people in place who have developed a hunch, have developed a nous for being able to see where these issues are. I suppose it goes back to a hunch, you know, trust your gut. And you do need to make sure that you continue to check, as Kevin says, do random checks. That's, I guess, on dealing with a specific application. Some of the other things that we deal with or have put issues in our buildings would be, number one, don't disregard the idea of moving building managers around. There are a couple of large companies within the city who move building managers regularly. The idea being that very often relationships develop, then a building manager is compromised by being approached by somebody. Now, if you move people around, you fracture those relationships and you make it more difficult. That's number one. Number two, look very carefully for people who are not taking leave in your organization. A large leave balance is an indicator of somebody up to no good. They may just be a very hard worker, but I can tell you that the forensic accountants, when they come in, the first thing they will look for is your leave balance. Because the theory goes like this: if I am running a scheme, I need to be close to make sure that my scheme continues to run or doesn't get uncovered. And therefore, I don't take leave. And that's a very, very important indicator. Look for buildings with high churn rates and buildings with high write-offs. So again, the theory goes that Nick is desperate for a flat. He goes to Mr. Adebayo in Yeovil. He gets all of his documentation. He moves into a Jozi housing flat. That doesn't solve his underlying fundamental financial problem, and that is that he doesn't have the money to pay the rent. And so that will very quickly unwind in the form of either higher arrears, you then vacate. And if that is happening on an ongoing basis or in specific buildings, you may pick up a pattern in those buildings. Training, as Kevin said, is absolutely key. Making sure that people are looking for all of these little tricks and tips that we have spoken about, that your people, be they administrators or other people within the organization, have those at their fingertips. And training has another important aspect, and that is that it does disabuse anybody who may be thinking that this is the way to augment their income, that in fact the company is on them and they're onto these new systems and when there's relevant information. So it indicates an attentiveness by the management. Some of the other things that one can do is often these scenarios work around vacant flats. So the point would be is that I get you in and I either will move you around. The various iterations. We have found that looking at vacant flats against utilities consumption is a very useful exercise to find out, is my system showing a vacant flat? And is it showing electricity consumption? That's one to worth going and knocking on the door of. Segmenting the functions, as Kevin has highlighted again, is absolutely key. So, for example, we have somebody, we have a letting manager. She has a very good nose for picking out these issues, and those that she does, she kicks back to her agents or administrators. But she's not able to load onto the system. So those files have to go across to somebody in finance who loads them, and we've spent a lot of time ensuring that that person in finance has a nose for some of these issues. So you've got somebody who is disconnected, and you've basically fragmented that relationship flow. And then the last is that there need to be repercussions, both for people who are presenting fraudulent documents and or for staff. It goes without saying, but it is very important to make sure that there are repercussions for those individuals. And I would leave that up to you as to exactly how you do that. I think that really is sort of a summary of the lists. I don't think I've got anything else to add on top of that. Safe to say that an inexperienced lease administrator leaves you almost as exposed as somebody who is colluding. And so while the job and the function itself may be very simple, you need to have experienced and well-trained people managing that. We all know that it is in these times, again, as Kevin has said, it is very tempting to take all comers when we've got vacancies going the way that they are. As has been urged before in our previous webinar, I would say rather have a vacant flat than put a dodgy tenant into that flat. So be discerning, make sure. We have separated out the extent to which vacancies are increasing from the extent to which people are able to let. The letting agents mustn't, or letting department mustn't be intimidated by increasing vacancies. They must do their job to the best of their abilities and within those parameters. And if that means they can only get 50 people in or 60 or whatever the number is, rather have that than the other way around. I think that's it. I've got a couple of questions just to Michelle, maybe. Perhaps you could highlight for everybody what the available checks are through your system and or others, and what you would advocate people using. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thanks, Nick. That was great. Real practical, analytical tips that I think most landlords would be able to easily look at and implement within their companies. There is one question that I think is very specific to what you've brought up, which was the great points about keeping the records of fraudulent documents. And do you have any kind of specific system that you keep these records? Do you have a physical Bible? Is it a digital Bible? How does that work?
Highly sophisticated, Angela. They go into a big piece of cardboard that's folded over, and it's got fraudulent applications written on it, and it lives in my office.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Nick. So yeah, but I think it's a great idea. I mean, to keep those documents and available, and maybe it would be a good idea to create a flip folder with it so it can be passed around the office. But yeah, that was great. Thank you, Nick. Next up, I've asked Michelle to join us today. She usually leaves us after giving us feedback on the rentals, but I have asked her to join us today to speak to us from TPN's point of view with this subject, and also to maybe give us some of the great work that TPN has done and their different programs in order to support landlords.
Hey, thanks, Angela. With regards to record keeping of fraudulent documents, this is something that TPN does do in our own environment. So every single application is logged, the IP address is logged, the cell phone number is logged, the bank account details are logged. Every single piece of information that forms part of that application is logged. And you may be asking, but why does TPN log everything from our client's perspective? Well, because fraud syndicates like to use credit bureaus to find the profile of quality tenants that they can then present to their landlords. And so it's our job to weed out those fraud syndicates and ensure that we know who they are and do not give them access to credit bureau data. And Afhco was one that pinged. Afhco, you'll remember, Kevin, you pinged on our system. And so we knew there was fraud going on in your environment, and we pinged you back and let you know. So we do see that type of behavior. And if we see it within our client's environment, we'll obviously pass that information on. But the applications that I'm talking about in this specific example are applications of credit bureau people, syndicates in this instance, trying to access the bureau to find tenants whose identity they can then steal. So let's talk about a little bit of some of Kevin's questions. And the first one was on asylum seekers. So TPN, obviously the first thing you want to do is you want to be able to verify the identity of the person that you are looking to rent to. And I just quickly want to share screen, if I may, for 2 minutes. I promise not to be long. I'm going to zip through this really, really quickly. This is on the TPN ID verification. And on the TPN ID verification, the first things that we're looking to have a look at here, to both Kevin and Nick's perspective, is not good enough just to do the ID verification and confirm that the name and ID number match. This is what we are looking for. And honestly, I can tell you, we get these. We run through about 500 applications a month at TPN for people looking to be TPN clients. And these are the type of fraud checks that we're looking for, fraud flags on the identity document. The first one is to check for the photo, and you will see that the photo of the applicant, this is the photo on the TPN ID verification, so we're giving you back a photo, is the photo on the identity document that you are seeing matching the photo that we're presenting back to you on the ID verification. The second thing is to check the date of issue on the ID document versus the date of issue on the credit check. So we're going to give you, according to Home Affairs, this is the issue date. Match that back. You'll be surprised how often these date of issues on the document that you are looking at, and I'm trying to focus with my mouse here, I hope you're seeing that, the date of issue versus what we're presenting back to you. And the third thing is to check the font on all of your ID documents. So are they Department of Home Affairs typical font size that you're looking for? And you'll see the South Africa here, quite fat zeros, quite fat O's versus the very thin, tall font that you're looking for over here. Angela, happy to share this with you, and then you can pass that on to your members as well. That's when you're dealing with a South African applicant. What we're dealing with here is, and I don't think what we're really dealing with here is illegal foreigners are all delinquent tenants. I think what we're dealing with here is fake illegal foreigners. Identity is easier to steal, manipulate, create than a real South African identity. So the question is, how do we then solve for that particular requirement? Kevin, you chatted about the C files, the thin files. So in terms of the National Credit Act, simply because nobody has information on their credit profiles, we're not able to negatively score that. So you can't negatively score someone because they've got a thin file. And a thin file is different to somebody who has limited information from which to make an assessment. So a thin file often can be ghost files. And a ghost file is someone who's created a whole new identity with a new identity number or fraudulent asylum seeker number. That would be a thin file, or worse than that, a ghost thin file, because it's a person who doesn't actually exist. And that should be a red flag. Immediately, that should be a red flag. When would it be a red flag? If you have somebody with a South African identity number and they are an 18, 19, 20-year-old, that would be acceptable. But when you're dealing with somebody who's much older than that, they should have credit information on their credit profile. Even if they're not very credit active, they would have job application data going through their credit profile, lease information. They've built it up over the years, and it's not to say that they have payment profile information, but they'll have a rich history of telephone numbers and of address information. So simply because you look at someone's credit profile and there's no historical address or telephone number or employment information, that is a big flag, right? Yes, people may not have payment profile. Yes, people may not have lease history information, but they do have activity on their credit profile, and that's your address and telephone number. So TPN, when we're looking for fraudulent applications, and we get an online application with an address and telephone number information, we're matching that address and that telephone number information back to the credit profile that we're looking at. And if we're not seeing that address and telephone number, not the one we just entered, but previously on their credit profile, and there's other telephone numbers or address information on the person's credit profile, we phone that number. So we're trying to then get in contact with the persons whose identity has potentially been stolen. So you want to always have a look at, does the address information of where they say they come from, because maybe it's not a lease, it can just be on their credit profiles, other address information. Maybe they applied a Capitec for a loan. Capitec's going to enter their address information that they're seeing at that point in time. Does that address information match to what you're seeing on their application? Same thing with the cell phone number. Always phone historic cell phone numbers where there is a higher risk of identity theft. Identity theft comes with Gmail accounts. They do not come where people use their legitimate work addresses. So if someone's communicating with you with a legitimate at realcompany.co.za email address, that is more legitimate than when you're seeing somebody with a Gmail account. Again, it's not to say someone with a Gmail account is a higher risk. It's adding all the risk flags together. Am I dealing with an asylum seeker who has a thin file with no information on them, who's working with me on only a Gmail account? These flags start to build up into a bigger picture. When it comes to credit bureau information, best case is to have your South African ID number, even if it's a refugee ID number. So your date of birth, 4 digits, 2081, that's your refugee number. Or a non-South African ID number, date of birth, 4 numbers, 18 whatever. Or your South African ID number, date of birth, 4 numbers, 08 something. TPN will always match that data on that individual. So that ID number belongs to that person. Doesn't matter if it's a 281, 181 or 081. And as they move through refugee status, foreign national into South African national, that number will stay the same, just the last 3 digits will change. And TPN will always match the credit data on that person back to that number. When we're dealing with someone with a passport numbers change. Just by their nature, every 5 years, that number is going, or 10 years, that number is going to change. So somebody who rents in your premises this year and stays in your apartment for 2 years and their passport number changes in the interim, or they get a South African ID number in the interim, that number is going to change. On your property management software systems, that data has to be updated. So when your tenant moves this year from having a passport number to having an ID number, get that data onto your property management system. Same with your passport numbers. The date of birth is key critical to match a passport number to an ID number. Key critical. So when we ask you to fill in, to do a credit check on asylum seeker, you're going to fill in that number plus the date of birth, plus the nationality, plus the name, plus the surname. That data all matched together will create a profile on the person. If the passport number changes or asylum seeker number changes and you've got the date of birth right, you've got the nationality, name and surname right, we will match that profile together for you. This is really, really important. So the data going into your property management system is key critical and must be updated if the person's identity documents change during the life cycle within the lease. I'm going through now, making my notes of where we made notes. So Blacklistings, Kevin, absolutely. 100%. A foreign national can be blacklisted, default listed on a credit bureau, the same as a South African. The data may not come into TPN's environment if on the property management system there's no date of birth. So we will only load, well, that's not entirely true. We will load it into the credit bureau without a date of birth. It's just not going to be matched to anything, because when someone does a credit check, our match is on date of birth, passport number, nationality, name and surname. And if there's no date of birth on the property management system, then we cannot match a lease back to that particular passport number or asylum seeker number or whatever it is. So data input is key critical in order for us to give data output back. And then I just want to say that there's a couple of things coming in our environment, some really exciting stuff. I'm so disappointed that that you've done this session now and you hadn't given me like an extra month, because I don't want to say, oh, people are our biggest weak in this chain. So how do we solve for, you know, not having to place our reliance on collusion or people's ability to read a Capitec statement? We shouldn't be relying on that. And then you've got a change in staff, and then I wish I could. That the system will be able to do that for you. It will be able to look at your affordability and give you a real affordability assessment, and it will pick up instances of where we would be reading, like what such good information that Kevin and Nick have given, such valuable, good information, but a system can do that. An AI system can do that and should do that. And we'll be doing that for you in the future, I promise, as it will be doing for your employment documents. Because as we both, Nick, Kevin, and I have pointed out, same data is used. Those cell phone numbers, the syndicates run out of cell phone numbers, so they reuse them. They make mistakes on the employee number or on the UIF. They make mistakes, and we put all of that into a central database, and we will store that for you, and we will be your AI, and that will be where your fraudulent documents are kept, not in Nick's box in his office, but in a real system that shares data between Nick's box and Kevin's box. And we'll be able to pick up that data for you. And I'm so sorry that this is where the process is at the moment. It's really not likely to go through collusion in your office.
Michelle, would you like to just, sorry, my internet glitched there for a second. So I missed the part where you were saying that we've done this a little bit too early. I don't know if anyone else glitched that out as well. If you could maybe just repeat that, because maybe we can—
For your benefit.
Yes.
Yeah, for your benefit. Angela, as what Nick and Kevin have alluded to, I mean, fraudulent documentation is rife. And what we really should be doing is that all that data, if it came into an AI system and we were able to read it and we were able to pick out instances of documents that appeared not to be correctly formatted and put together, and we can pick out where there is reuse of information, where we've seen it in other documents, and we can read and highlight that is what we're working on.
Okay, so in other words, we're going to have another session soon to go through that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But first, just so that everyone knows, we're releasing Poppy Pack in literally not even 2 weeks. Friday next week. So that's what we focused on, is getting a Poppy Pack out to you. And as soon as we finish with that, then we'll start working on this this very exciting bank and employment supporting documentation problem.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go back to normal view. Okay, so that was really really informative. I'm going to just go through some of the questions that have come up. Anonymous attendee just wanted to highlight one of the frauds that they've picked up where someone put in an application, it wasn't approved for whatever reason, and then the agent sold these documents onto prospective tenants. So while the documents weren't fraudulent, the placement was. I'm sure we've seen that around as well. And then a question from Carabello. He would like to know, do landlords and managing agents do any home affairs document verification besides ID? He's looking specifically at asylum documents and other temporary permits.
Angela, maybe I can just touch on that. So I don't have a specific answer, but given what's happened here, we are busy investigating a system as we speak. I'm not sure its capabilities at this point, but I'll be glad to share the information once we have full details.
Okay. Nick, anything to comment on there? You good?
No, Angela, I don't think so. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, you've touched, there are more and more tools being developed to address these issues, and I would urge people to make sure that they are utilizing those. And the second is that, an integrous group of staff who are closely managed and managers who are close to their processes, random checks, etc. Yeah, really, this is not a hands-off sort of an operation, unfortunately. And I don't think there is any way to do that until such time as Michelle's AI is able to run the thing for us.
Okay. Then I've got Arnold, and he wanted to know about the bank statement. He said on the one bank statement that you showed, there wasn't capital letters on the original document, the non-fraudulent one. And he wanted to know should it have been that way?
Angela, I must be honest, I've seen so many documents. I know I passed that comment. I'm actually not sure if it is actually also a fraudulent one or an actual one. I'll be happy to get the feedback internally and then pass it on.
Great, thank you. Anonymous, yes, Nick.
Just a thought on that. Would it not be worth our while as JPOMA to try and get an indication from the banks of the standard format of their report, of their statements? Even if they gave us, is it all printed on the same stationery? We might find that, in fact, no, well, all Capitec's in KwaZulu-Natal do it with capital letters and all the ones in Joburg don't. I don't know, but it may be useful as part of a pack to get an indication from the banks for things to look out for.
Yeah, great idea, Nick. I will put that, I'll start working on that. Good
yeah, Angela, just something to bear in mind is that obviously you can get statements in different ways today. So you can do it online, or you can basically log on and get a bank stamped statement for virtually every bank. I say virtually, I've seen it myself on a couple. And then you can get the statements that are printed by the ATM that have also got the stamp on it. Then you've got the branch generated one. So yeah, we'd have to just understand all the different statements that each bank produces.
Okay, yeah, I'll sort that out. Anonymous said we should share this information somehow. So this video will be put onto the JPOMA YouTube channel. I will be emailing out that link to everybody as well as all the presentations from today. And that can be shared out to everyone. If you haven't subscribed to the JPOMA YouTube channel, I suggest you do that. All our webinars are posted on there within the same day as the webinar, so it'll be on this afternoon. And yeah, please share it out to everybody who you want to. The more people that see this, the better for the industry. And Mpo says, hello, Michelle. And that is all the questions that have come through now.
Angela, yes. there's actually a question there from Mpo.
Oh, it hasn't come through to me.
It says, hi Michelle, please discuss the difference between default and judgment in length. Okay.
That's weird.
Okay, the difference between default and judgment in length. A there's about 11 different, no, there's not about, there are 11 different categories of data that the credit bureaus will hold information on. And each category of information has a different retention period associated with it. A judgment is a court record. It's a civil court record that's been handed down by the court with regards to an amount outstanding in terms of civil debt. That data will be loaded on the credit bureau for a period of 5 years, although its prescription is 30 years. So the credit provider or whoever took judgment against the consumer can collect on that debt for a period of 30 years. The credit bureaus will only retain and display it for a period of 5 years. As soon as the debt has been paid back, the capital amount of the debt has been paid back, the credit provider must issue the credit bureau with a notification. The data must be removed from the credit bureau databases. A consumer also has the right, if the credit provider doesn't delete it, to come to the bureau and log a dispute and ask for it to be removed once it's been paid up. In terms of a default is an adverse listing, and judgments then get loaded across all full bureaus. The data comes in from a central provider of the information who goes out to court and literally captures it into an electronic format and then distributes it to the bureaus. In terms of default information is information loaded by a client of the credit bureau. So typically default information across bureaus is different. For example, TPN clients are part of the TransUnion data sharing, and so when a default is loaded on TPN, it's then shared with the TransUnion environment as a default. A default will sit on a person's credit profile for a period of 12 months. That's its length of retention, and once it's been paid, again, it must be deleted from their credit profile. So payment profile is quite important for TPN in this regard, because payment profile will remain on a person's credit profile for 5 years. So even if a person had a default and it was removed, it's okay because the payment profile will display for the 5-year period. And typically leading up to a default, there has to be 3 months of non-payment or partial payment. So the account has to be 3 consecutive business cycles in arrears before you can load a default on a person's credit profile. Plus, they must be given a letter of demand, and the letter of demand must specifically state the intention of the supplier, in this case the agent, to load a default on their credit profile. And they must be given 20 business days to remedy the breach and make payment. So after the letter of demand, 20 business days has passed, and the account is 3 consecutive billing cycles in arrears. At that point, a default can be loaded onto a person's credit profile. So it's quite severe. The time frame now is quite severe, which is why payment profile is more important, because you want to see that did not pay month 1, month 2 did not pay, then only in month 3 can you load the default. Again, when the amount is settled, so the tenant comes in and settles the account, on the payment profile, because by law the default needs to be removed when it's been settled, TPN will automatically remove the default from the person's credit profile when we see those paid up status coming in. That's okay for our purposes because we're still going to see the 3 months of did not pay leading up to that default being loaded, which is why payment profile is more important than a default in terms of the weighting of the score that we generate on an individual.
I suppose that would then also be able to weed out the serial non-payers who just know that they're going to get the default removed, so you can keep track of them if it's a habitual thing. Anonymous has just made a very good point here that when checking the bank statements to make sure that the branch code actually matches up with the actual branch, which I suppose, I mean, it's pretty easy to pick up that as well if you have a list of the branch codes and make sure that they tie up. Thank you for that. I don't see any more questions coming through, so unless anybody else has some final comment that they would like to add before we go. No, everyone happy? Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you to my panelists for giving up your time. I really appreciate it. I know our members appreciate it. I know we've got a lot of people here who aren't JPOMA members, so they've also benefited from it, which is great. The more information that gets out there, the better. So please share, and thank you, and have a very good week, and I'm sure I'll speak to some of you throughout the week. Thank you so much.